You need to understand that there is a profound truth hidden in the silence of someone who chooses to pull away, that even in their absence, even when they refuse to answer, even when they turn their back, their mind is still occupied with you, and this is a reality that is often ignored, misunderstood, or dismissed because what they show to the world is cold, detached, unreadable. But what they feel in private is a storm of emotions they cannot control, cannot express, and are terrified to confront. And you need to understand that this storm exists because you matter, because your presence was never ordinary, and because your absence is a reflection of the gravity they refused to face when they had you in front of them. And there is a lesson in this that you must hear, a lesson about the weight of human connection, the power of boundaries, and the undeniable truth that love is never wasted when it is given authentically, fully, and without compromise. You need to understand that when someone avoids, when someone distances themselves, it is not because you were too much, or because your love was wrong, or because your heart was too open. It is because they were unprepared to meet the depth of what you offered. And in their absence, in the quiet moments of solitude, they are confronted with the realization that what they chose to flee from is precisely what they cannot live without. And this is the paradox that often goes unseen, that their avoidance is a reflection of their fear, and their fear is proof of the impact you had, and you need to understand that in those private hours, when the world is asleep, when there are no distractions, they replay your voice, your gestures, your laughter, the way your presence made life feel lighter, more meaningful, more possible, and it is here in these moments that the truth of their feelings emerges, unfiltered, raw, and undeniable. And you need to understand that their reflection is not about manipulation. It is not about playing games. It is simply the human heart recognizing what it lost, recognizing what it cannot replace, and recognizing that you were never replaceable, never optional, and never ordinary. You need to understand that what they do in private is think endlessly, obsessively, about the choices they made, about the words they said, about the opportunities to show up that they ignored. And while they may never reach out, while they may never apologize, while they may continue to present themselves as distant or unavailable to the world, in those private moments, they are forced to confront the truth of your significance, the weight of your absence, the consequences of their decisions. And you need to understand that this is where your power lies, not in confrontation, not in arguments, not in proving yourself, but in simply existing with dignity, with integrity, with boundaries intact, and allowing them to live with the reality they created. And you need to understand that their private reflection is evidence of your impact, proof that love, patience, authenticity, and emotional availability leave an imprint that no avoidance can erase. You need to understand that during these hours of solitude, they feel something they rarely admit, a combination of longing, regret, and confusion, a gnawing awareness that someone cared in a way they were incapable of reciprocating. And you need to understand that this is not punishment, this is not a scheme, this is the natural consequence of the human heart being confronted with its own limitations, and it is proof that what you gave was meaningful, lasting, and irreplaceable. And you need to understand that their avoidance cannot nullify the authenticity of your love, cannot erase the courage it took to show up fully, cannot diminish the strength it required to set boundaries, and cannot change the fact that in their private contemplation, they are reminded every moment of what they let go, what they could not honor, and what they cannot forget. You need to understand that their thinking in private is a mirror to your own growth, a reflection of the fact that choosing yourself, choosing your peace, choosing your boundaries is never selfish, it is never trivial, it is never too late, and it is exactly what transforms their inability to be present into your freedom, your clarity, and your emotional sovereignty. And you need to understand that this is not about revenge. This is not about teaching a lesson. This is about understanding the undeniable impact you had, the significance of your presence, the value of your love, and the truth that walking away when you are disrespected or undervalued is not rejection. It is preservation. It is affirmation. It is proof that you refuse to settle for less than what you deserve. And you need to understand that in those private, unobserved moments, they are reckoning with what they failed to cherish. And that reckoning exists because you were real, because you were human, because you were authentic, and because you dared to be everything they could not handle in public. You need to understand that the emotions they feel in private, the thoughts they wrestle with when no one is watching, the quiet ache they cannot express, the longing they cannot admit, are all evidence that you mattered more than they realized, more than they acknowledged, and more than they could ever articulate. And you need to understand that your absence is not emptiness. It is impact, not silence, but significance, not loss, but reflection. And you need to understand that the strength it took for you to step away, to honor your boundaries, to refuse to participate in games, to value your own emotional health above their avoidance, is what forces them into this private reckoning. And it is in this reckoning that you see the proof of your worth, the evidence of your authenticity, and the quiet, undeniable power of a love given fully and a self-respect defended. You need to understand that what they do in private during no contact is not about punishment for them. It is about truth for you. It is about understanding that your presence created weight in their life, that your absence creates reflection, that your love leaves a mark, that your courage inspires, that your boundaries speak louder than words ever could. And you need to understand that this truth is liberating because it confirms what you have always known, that your value is undeniable, that your authenticity is irreplaceable, that your love is unforgettable, and that stepping away from those who cannot meet you fully is not just survival, it is empowerment. And you need to understand that in their private moments of reflection, you are present, you are remembered, you are acknowledged, and you are everything they cannot ignore. And you need to understand that this is the undeniable proof of your power, your worth, and your ability to love fully without compromise. You need to understand that boundaries are not walls. They are lifelines. They are signals that tell the world that your heart matters, that your energy matters, that your presence is not disposable. And yet, in a relationship with someone avoidant, boundaries feel like the hardest thing you have ever set because the temptation to bend, to compromise, to soften, to excuse is so strong when your heart is involved, and you need to understand that setting a boundary is not rejection, it is not cruelty, it is not a punishment, it is an act of courage, an act of self-respect, and an act of love for yourself. And you need to understand that every moment you honored your limits, every time you said no when your instincts screamed yes to what you did not deserve, every time you walked away from behaviors that diminished your value, you were giving yourself the gift that they could never give you. And you need to understand that this gift is the most radical form of love because it tells your heart that it is worthy, that it deserves respect, and that it will not settle for anything less than authenticity, truth, and integrity. And you need to understand that this is why avoidants struggle, because in their private minds, they are constantly wrestling with what they cannot control, what they cannot take for granted, and what they cannot understand. And the more you honor yourself, the more they realize the cost of their avoidance. And you need to understand that this realization does not require confrontation, explanation, or proof, because it is already written in the space you created for yourself, in the distance you upheld, in the boundaries you protected, in the love you refused to dilute. And you need to understand that they cannot erase this truth, cannot rewrite it, and cannot undo the clarity that comes from choosing yourself. You need to understand that boundaries are a reflection of love, not anger. And yet, when someone is avoidant, when they are accustomed to taking without giving, they often interpret your self-respect as a threat, as abandonment, as punishment, as something to fear. And you need to understand that this is not a reflection of your intentions, it is a reflection of their fear, their inability to tolerate depth, their lack of preparedness for emotional intimacy. And you need to understand that this fear, this inability, this avoidance is exactly why your boundaries are necessary. Because without them, your heart becomes expendable, your energy becomes invisible, and your worth becomes negotiable. And you need to understand that no matter how much they struggle in private, no matter how much they reflect, no matter how much they wish, it does not diminish the power of your decision to honor yourself. And you need to understand that choosing no contact, choosing space, choosing distance is not a loss for you. It is a reclaiming of your life, your dignity, and your emotional freedom. And you need to understand that it is in this reclamation that the universe aligns to bring clarity, healing, and the undeniable proof that love is never lost when it is given authentically, courageously, and without compromise. You need to understand that the people who cannot meet you fully, who cannot love without fear, who cannot show up with integrity, will always be challenged by your boundaries. And you need to understand that this challenge is not a reflection of weakness in you, it is a reflection of weakness in them, a reflection of the fact that they were never ready. And you need to understand that in choosing yourself, in choosing your peace, you are modeling what it means to love fully while refusing to be diminished. And you need to understand that the ripple of this decision goes far beyond them. It impacts every interaction, every relationship, every moment in which your authenticity meets the world. And you need to understand that this ripple is your proof, your legacy, your demonstration that love, when given with integrity, transforms the way the world meets you. And you need to understand that even if they never acknowledge it, even if they never thank you, even if they never recognize your worth, you have already won because you have not compromised, you have not hidden, you have not diluted, and you have not diminished yourself. You need to understand that boundaries are not static. They are living, breathing signals that tell your heart and the universe what is acceptable and what is not. And you need to understand that each time you honor a boundary, each time you resist the pull to settle, to explain, to argue, you are strengthening yourself, reinforcing your sense of worth, and teaching others how to treat you. And you need to understand that this is why avoidants cannot comprehend the impact of your decision, why they are forced to live with the weight of their own avoidance, why they are confronted with what they cannot have. And you need to understand that this is the natural consequence of integrity, of courage, and of self-respect. And you need to understand that it is also a gift to yourself, because it frees you from the burden of attachment to someone who cannot meet you where you are, and it opens the space for someone who can, someone who will, someone who recognizes that love without fear, love without avoidance, and love without compromise is the only love worth having. And you need to understand that this is the beauty of boundaries, the power of distance, and the undeniable truth that walking away is not failure, it is survival. It is awakening, and it is self-love in its purest form. You need to understand that setting boundaries does not make you unkind, unloving, or heartless. It makes you human, it makes you wise, it makes you courageous. And you need to understand that in their private reflection, they are thinking about the life they cannot have with you, the love they cannot sustain, the depth they cannot tolerate. And you need to understand that your decision to uphold your boundaries forces them to see themselves clearly, forces them to feel, forces them to confront what they avoided. And you need to understand that this confrontation is the evidence of your authenticity, the proof of your impact, and the quiet power of your love that will not be diluted by fear, avoidance, or unwillingness. You need to understand that boundaries are not punishment. Distance is not revenge. Stepping away is not failure, and refusing to lower your standards is not arrogance. It is the embodiment of truth. It is the affirmation of your worth. It is the demonstration that love given fully is never diminished by absence. And you need to understand that in their private, unobserved moments, they are thinking, regretting, wishing, realizing, longing, and struggling with the impact of your decision. And you need to understand that this is not manipulation. This is not power play. This is simply the natural consequence of choosing yourself. And you need to understand that every moment you maintain your integrity, every time you honor your boundaries, every day you choose self-respect over compromise, is proof that your love is meaningful, your presence is valuable, and your heart is never to be taken for granted. You need to understand that the hardest part of letting go is not walking away. It is standing still in the truth of what you deserve. It is feeling the emptiness of absence and realizing that absence does not mean the end of your value. It does not mean the end of your love. It does not mean that your heart has failed. And you need to understand that when someone avoidant experiences your no contact, it forces a confrontation with their own choices. It forces them to reckon with what they ignored, avoided, or betrayed. And you need to understand that in those quiet moments, when the world does not see, when no one is looking, they are thinking about what they cannot have. They are questioning why you stayed so strong, why you did not chase, why you did not excuse, why you did not allow their fear to diminish your light. And you need to understand that this reflection is not something they expected. It is not something they prepared for. It is a truth they cannot escape. And you need to understand that this is where real power lies. Not in arguments, not in ultimatums, not in anger, but in your quiet, unwavering, unshakable choice to honor yourself. And you need to understand that this choice ripples through every memory, every conversation, every moment they thought they controlled, every time they took you for granted. And you need to understand that the invisible weight of your integrity is heavier than anything they have ever experienced, because it carries with it the proof that love can exist without compromise, that value can exist without apology, and that respect can exist without permission. And you need to understand that they are confronted with their own limitations, their own fears, their own inability to sustain what you offered freely. And you need to understand that this is not revenge. This is not manipulation. This is the natural consequence of choosing your dignity over their avoidance, your self-respect over their indecision, and your freedom over their control. You need to understand that when someone avoidant lives with your no contact, they are facing a mirror they have avoided for a long time, a mirror that reflects their patterns, their fears, their inability to meet you fully, and you need to understand that in that reflection, they see themselves clearly for the first time. They feel the weight of what they missed. They question the choices they made, and you need to understand that this reflection is painful, it is disorienting, it is uncomfortable, and yet it is necessary because it cannot be undone. It cannot be ignored and it cannot be dismissed. And you need to understand that your absence is not empty. It is filled with the life you chose to reclaim, the love you chose to preserve, the peace you chose to protect. And you need to understand that in protecting yourself, you are not only teaching them, you are teaching yourself that love is not compromise, that worth is not negotiable, and that happiness is not dependent on the validation of someone who could not see your value when it mattered most. You need to understand that this private reckoning, this confrontation with your absence, is something they never expected because they relied on your tolerance, they relied on your forgiveness, they relied on your patience, and they relied on the false comfort that they could return whenever convenient. And you need to understand that by refusing to return on their terms, by refusing to justify, by refusing to make exceptions, by refusing to be available when their choices were inconsistent, you have given them a lesson that no lecture, no argument, no text, no apology could ever teach. And you need to understand that this lesson is felt deeply in a way that is quiet, intimate, and unavoidable. And you need to understand that this is the proof of your power, not in your anger, not in your retaliation, not in your words, but in your actions, in your consistency, in your courage to stay true to yourself despite the pull of love, despite the temptation of attachment, despite the ache of longing. You need to understand that they are living with their choices in a way that exposes the depth of their own avoidance, the extent of their own fear, the consequences of their inability to act with courage. And you need to understand that your no contact is not punishment. It is revelation. It is clarity. It is the undeniable reality of what happens when someone refuses to compromise their self-worth for someone who cannot meet them fully. And you need to understand that this revelation will follow them quietly, persistently, and unavoidably in every thought, in every memory, in every regret, in every longing. And you need to understand that this is not revenge. This is justice. This is integrity. This is the natural outcome of choosing yourself over someone who could not honor you. You need to understand that the weight of your decision will settle into their consciousness slowly, painfully, profoundly, because they did not expect to lose the ease of your presence, the comfort of your availability, the willingness of your heart, and you need to understand that in their private moments, they are forced to feel the absence of what they took for granted, the reality that you cannot be replaced, the truth that your love was given fully and will not be compromised. And you need to understand that this is the ultimate power of no contact, because it allows them to live with the truth they could not face while you were present. The truth that love requires courage, that commitment requires honesty, and that connection requires integrity. And you need to understand that your choice to step back, to remove yourself from compromise, to protect your heart, is not cruelty. It is wisdom. It is self-respect. It is an act of radical love for yourself. And you need to understand that in this act, you are stronger than they will ever realize, wiser than they will ever acknowledge, and freer than they will ever experience with you in their life. You need to understand that this is not about holding a grudge. This is not about anger. This is not about keeping score. This is about living your truth, standing in your value, and being fully present for yourself even when they cannot be present for you. And you need to understand that they will feel this in ways that are quiet, subtle, and unavoidable, because absence has a weight, boundaries have a presence, and integrity has a power that cannot be ignored, manipulated, or reversed. And you need to understand that in their private reflection, they are thinking of you more than you know, feeling the consequences of their own avoidance more than they expected, and understanding that love requires what they could not give. You need to understand that your no contact is not silence. It is a statement, it is proof. It is undeniable evidence that love is not enough when respect is missing, that presence is not optional when connection is demanded, that courage is not negotiable when fear dominates. And you need to understand that in every private moment they spend with your absence, they are reminded of your worth, your power, and your refusal to settle. And you need to understand that this is the quiet, profound, and inescapable truth that they must live with. And you need to understand that living with it is something they were never prepared for. And yet, it is the natural consequence of loving with integrity. And you need to understand that by choosing yourself, you have given them the most important lesson they could ever learn, even if they do not realize it, even if they never thank you, and even if they never return.